one. Let's begin. Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. It is currently 10:53, and it is a Thursday. So happy almost Friday to you guys. And again, thank you all for waiting. We're just discussing some things as we always do. If any of you run YouTube channels and lives, then maybe you'll understand as well. But yeah, tonight we have a really cool guest. Frey, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on here, man. It's an honor. I like you guys' podcast.
Yeah, hey, thank you, man. Yeah, I forgot who I found you on another YouTube channel. And I watched shout out to Frey's Instagram. I watched a couple of your videos. You also have a YouTube channel as well. And a lot of that really spoke to me in a poetic sort of way. I really enjoyed watching your video and your content. I really liked. And it stuck out. I'm sure Juanchalo saw a little bit of it too. But yeah, again, I'm just going to give a little shout out to who's all in here right now. Shout out to Destiny. Thank you. Gabby, Red Dog, Thomas, and anybody else in here. I see there's like 8 people watching. So thank you all for watching our video right now. Chico the Coaster. Hello. So yeah, Juanchalo, did you have anything to add before we start?
No, I mean, it's just good to be back, guys. So
yeah, it's good to be back. Yeah, good to be back. We got lots of things planned. To those of you that have kept up with the community posts, try to post as we can. We're now on Spotify. We have like 6 episodes
finally,
in.
You should thank Marcus for that, because I'm like too lazy, or I got a lot of shit going on. So Marcus, thank him. He's a really hard worker for this channel.
Oh, hey, I appreciate it, man. Takes 2 to tango though. But yeah, I do appreciate it. So yeah, and we got things planned for the future. So without further ado, Frey, again, thank you so much for coming on. And before we get to the nitty gritty, maybe if you could explain a little bit as far as like who you are to our guests who maybe are not too familiar with you.
For sure, yeah, man. It's a pleasure. So my name is Frey. Don't feel comfortable giving out my whole government name, so I don't think we're at that level yet with me in the social media, spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Frey. Yeah, so my name is Frey. I am of Mexican Indigenous heritage, right? I managed to kind of reconnect and find, the pueblos I come from who are Nahuatl communities or Nahua, communities who speak Nahuatl. I the pueblos where I come from is like a pueblo in Tlaxcala known as Huitzilan or Huitzitila, now known as Huichila, and it's a very remote area, and it's very spaced out and everything, and there is a Nahua presence there, so which is why I call myself, I guess Nahua. It's like the group I belong in, and I'm just a history enthusiast. I ever since I was like in high school, I love to study history. Especially Mesoamerican history. I don't really know too much about world history, but I study Mesoamerican history, and specifically within Central Mexico, Central Mexico, like Mexico City or even Tlaxcala, in the pre-colonial context, So
Awesome.
studying different, it's really cool. It's really awesome. You can learn a lot, from the ancestors and everything, And I'm a history enthusiast, meaning that I'm not a professional anthropologist. I am trying to work on, going that career path in the future. But for now, I'm just a history enthusiast who just does a lot of research and reads manuscripts and also talks to the community, to learn like those modern, contemporary social structures, stuff like that.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. I'm a huge fan of Mesoamerican history, especially like the 14th, 15th century, learning about Tenochtitlan and even the Tlaxcalan empire civilization.
Yeah, it was a confederacy, like a confederate state.
Yeah, and I heard that they had their own city too. I was like, I read a book. I forgot the name of it. I think I need to post it. It was about like conquistador logs, and they had went into great or some decent depth about the Tlaxcalan environment where they lived and what in the Confederacy. And they were talking about all these buildings that they had. It was just really impressive. They were comparing it to cities in Europe. I'll try to find that book. I think it was called the Conquistadors. But anyway, yeah, that's really neat that you have Tlaxcalan ancestry.
Oh yeah, huge congrats on reconnecting. And I was going to show you this. We're kind of like brothers here in a sense. Let me show you this real fast. Let me add this to the screen. Is it okay? Yeah. This is my Tlaxcalteca record right here. I am a descendant as well.
Really?
That's my seventh great uncle right here from 1802, and that was in Montemorelos. So they had immigrated up to the north. The Tlaxcalans went everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what's crazy about like a little bit of history about that, for some of you guys watching, a little bit of fun fact, when the Spaniards were like, trying to move, mega expeditions up north, they took, indigenous allies, as like the original Mexicanos, the Nahuas and Nahuatl speaking people. Mainly it was a lot of Tlaxcaltecas, but they migrated up north and settled in the areas of like the Great Chichimeca region, like in Zacatecas and stuff like that. So if you're able to do your genealogy that goes back to like a couple centuries or the early 16th century, maybe even 17th century, you will find, 17th century, 18th century, you'll possibly find a, Nahuatl relative or Nahua relative. And that's because like in 1590, when there was this great migration going on, there was a great migration, like I think it was like 400 families left Tlaxcala and populated the new settlements of New Spain. And so that's why some people, even in New Mexico and in Texas, they'll find people who have Tlaxcalteca ancestors. I actually know somebody from Temecula, here in the Kumeyaay territory where I live, north of me in Temecula. There's someone who actually found a Tlaxcalteca ancestor. So yeah, it's pretty common to find that.
Hell yeah. I saw a lot of entries, both in Nuevo León and Coahuila, where there was a lot of Tlaxcalans there listed. So they definitely immigrated up to the north, especially also, San Luis Potosí, they were using the war against the Guachichil. So, but yeah, a lot of people probably descend from Tlaxcalans. I would say probably more people descend from them than they would the Mexica, which I think is a misconception. It's kind of funny. People would say the Mexica or whatever, Mexica descendant. It's like, no, you're probably more likely a Tlaxcalteca descendant if you traced it back. But that's what I keep saying on this channel. Yeah, it's pretty ironic, man.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, in the beginning of my reconnecting journey, considering the fact that my father was born and raised in Distrito Federal, Mexico City, the capital, and right over there by Rio Churubusco, right next to Nezahualcóyotl, right next to the El Coliseum Azteca, the Aztec stadium. And he grew up there, and my dad always had this like neo-Mexica, like a mindset where he thought we were Mexica. So as I was reconnecting, and I began to dig into my own genealogy, and then I was humbled when I realized, oh shit, I come from the at that time I thought, oh, the traitors,
yeah,
like how ironic, So my reality just shattered, and I was like humbled. I was like, damn, like maybe this is a time, this is a learning experience, and maybe I should really consider like the pain, the struggle that these people actually went to, And yeah, it's crazy, the whole neo-Mexica, mindset, how it's just like has a hold on a lot of people sometimes, and it's definitely a challenge or hurtful conversation that the diaspora needs to have.
But it's so ironic because, like I said, by the numbers, it's way more likely statistically somebody would be a Tlaxcalteca than a Mexica. So it's just interesting. And I was gonna say about this. Oh yeah, so we covered this in another video like before on the channel, where me and Marcus's position as far as the Tlaxcaltecas are concerned is we don't consider them traitors because they were never friends with the Mexica to begin with, so they weren't really betraying anybody.
Exactly. And if somebody wants to talk about traitors, how come we don't talk about the whole deal in the pre-colonial times where it was a triple alliance, or not yet a triple alliance, but it was the Tenochcas Mexicas that allied with another Nahua group, another Nahua kingdom, and then they allied with the Tlaxcaltecas to overthrow, I believe, another Nahua kingdom known as the Huastecas, or another group down there in that region. And so the Mexicas had an alliance with the Tlaxcaltecas in that time period before colonization. And then what the Mexicas, the Tenochcas did at the end, after conquering that, after allying with Tlaxcaltecas and having to conquer that other, common enemy, they went ahead and they turned their backs on the Tlaxcaltecas and initiated the Flowery Wars, invading them. So it's like
Oh shit!
they're
Yeah,
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like it's very ironic, but it's this historical
Yeah.
bias that a lot of people have kind of created, off of history, and it's very dangerous, yeah, because believe it or not, the Tlaxcaltecas have even received a lot of hate, for a lot of the things they did from these neo-Mexica groups. But not only that, it's like there's even jokes that the modern day Tlaxcaltec, pueblos also receive just off of base of memes or whatever, like Tlaxcala no existe. Nobody knows how that meme came about, but it's very harmful. It's a very harmful rhetoric to the actual, Tlaxcaltecos.
There's a meme that's saying that they don't exist. Why would that even
Yeah.
be? Like they still exist. Obviously, you still have Nawa speakers and communities down there. So how the hell would they not exist anymore?
I don't know. It's like somebody just made a meme and a mockery out of like Tlaxcala no existe, like Tlaxcala doesn't exist, and like people sometimes try to reverse that, and like kind of make a mockery of that joke. Like, what do you mean it doesn't exist? And like they'll give like a Star Trek, or a Star Wars a cruiser, and they'll be like, you see, they found this Star Wars cruiser outside of Tlaxcala. This is a super mega advanced, civilization in Tlaxcala. They do exist, So it's still very hurtful just to say those, comments or whatever, about Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala doesn't exist because, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Interesting.
Before I was confused in the past, where I was like, where I was thinking about it in terms of like, does the nation state like basically what would have connected them all in the past, would that still exist? But I was looking at it from the wrong angle. So it's just a bunch of separate Tlaxcalan communities that would have that ancestry, but they're not gone. They're still around. It's not. But I was thinking like I was picturing like a big widespread nation, as in like that had disappeared, but I don't even know if that had existed to begin with, because when the Tlaxcalans, like let's say those 400 families moved from Tlaxcala right up to the north, were they still connected technically, or was that new communities that were formed of Tlaxcalans? That's something that's interesting to explore.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. Maybe they might have been connected in another sense, but yeah, I mean that's definitely an interesting, perspective that I haven't even looked into myself. But yeah, eventually they settled in like I guess like over genealogy, right? Like I guess like the people, within, like in future generations they kind of become erased, over time. So yeah, I mean it's pretty crazy to think about that, the migration patterns and how you forgot.
I guess I like assumed that they were all still part of one nation state even when they moved, but maybe not necessarily back then. They could have just been separate communities, but just Tlaxcalan. So yeah, it's just interesting things to like ponder over.
Do you think, Frey, you being a Mesoamerican historian and knowing a lot of information, do you think the Spanish get too much credit for like their takeover of like Tenochtitlan and pretty much fighting Aztecs and winning? Like, there's not even that much mention about Tlaxcalan like warriors, or just like the intricacies of like how complicated the battles were. Like it pretty much like was follow Curly Tlapolaya?
Yeah, Curly Tlapolaya. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he pretty much called it like an indigenous civil war. Not even so much the Spaniards even doing that much damage. I mean, they did, but like it was pretty much between the Tlaxcalans and the Mexica Aztec.
Yeah, civil war. That's crazy. But I mean, they weren't from the same, kingdom or nation, or city states. What they really were. They were just a group of individuals who spoke the same language, right? And therefore they're classified as Nawa, because that's really what a Nawa is. It's a group of people who speak the Nahuatl language, depending on whatever variant. It doesn't matter. You're Nawa. But and we share the same ethnohistory as the Mexica Tenochcas. Like we all came from the Seven Kings of Chicomostoc. But I think that Spaniards do receive a lot of credit for that, because it wasn't just even the Tlaxcaltecas as well. Even though there is evidence of like of the Spaniards noting that when the Spaniards first met the Tlaxcaltecas at the gates in their city, that they fought with ferocity, and the Spaniards also quoted that that they've never fought people like that in Europe, because and the credibility behind that still kind of stands, because the people who were who were soldiers at that time were already veterans from Spain, fighting against the Muslims and the Moors. So hearing that coming from a Spaniard's account, it's not something that's like really taken lightly, right? Because they're veterans themselves. So them saying that they fought with great ferocity, it's kind of taken, kind of serious. But there was other pueblos, other nations, other pueblos that were that were taken advantage of by the Mexica Tenochcas, and they didn't like that very much. So of course they saw a cause and they saw an opportunity, and they just rallied up together, and they toppled down the Mexica Tenochcas, and also not even just for the grand city of or the pueblo of Tenochtitlan, but also Spain never had no real army in Mesoamerica or New Spain. What they really had was a Spanish soldiers, but at the same time they had a major nation or major army of like indigenous allies, and that's a bias where people tend to kind of like ignore or look over because of their bias, because like there is a lot of indigenous allies, and there were indigenous conquistadores. For example, like there's a Mexica conquistador. His name is Martin or Valero de la Cruz, who was of Mexica, from the pueblo of Mexica, the Nochcas, and he was a conquistador. He earned land, and he was given the title of nobility in New Spain, and he's recorded and everything. So it's like a lot of the credit does go to like a lot of the indigenous people, who were also fighting alongside with the Spaniards for the cause or whatever. So that's where we got to throw away our biases out the window, and look at the history at face value with an unbiased opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And the Spaniards, when they landed in Mexico in Veracruz, I believe they had already had some allies in the Caribbean islands. I think maybe there were some natives that were with them, along with natives that they had met in Veracruz that decided to side with them when they moved further inland in Mexico. So when they fought the Tlaxcalans, I don't know how many native allies they had at that time, but I think it was a significant amount, I believe.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of pueblos, and I think we still got the names for those pueblos too. But yeah, you're right. When they landed in Veracruz, they did first encounter the Totonacas. But even when they came to Mexico, they had indigenous Caribbeans,
Yeah.
along with them as well, you know. So yeah, they even had African slaves as well. The first person who brought smallpox to Mexico, we actually know the name of that individual, and we also know the names of the indigenous Caribbeans, the Tainos, who also came along the boat, with Cortez and stuff. So yeah, you could probably read that in the Codex Florentine, chapter 12. It'll give you the name of that. Of
Yeah,
those
I would like to
individuals.
know. I always wish, like, I don't know, I brought this up in other videos, that like if indigenous people back in like 1492 could have had like at least one thing, it would have been medicine, advancement in medicine to like save them from diseases. But what's funny is I was talking with Juan Chiloa about one of our videos regarding when the Spaniards got to the Philippines. So many of them died because they weren't like accustomed to the diseases. Like I believe yellow fever was one of them. So they also got sick as well, and some I think also got sick when they got to the Caribbean initially, in the Hispaniola. But yeah, that's one thing that it's, I don't know, it's like 90% of indigenous people pass, which is really crazy. But I love talking about Mesoamerican history and Clutch Collins, but I think we wanted to go in a little bit about mental health work.
For sure.
You do
Yeah,
some mental
definitely.
health work, correct?
Yeah. I do a lot of like self work, and also with the help of professional work. Like I do take medications, and I do have therapy. Um, I have a non-biased opinion about therapy. I know that there's like a group of like indigenous folks, even people
Mhm.
from my community, who are so against therapy because it's the white man's, science or whatever, and it's just like, come on, dude. Like, our people had, we had words for therapy, we had therapists, we had doctors, and that's something people don't really want to have a conversation about. Is like, do you really want to surrender, this kinds of achievements to the white man? Like, really, bro? Like, are you gonna surrender science to the white man? And it's just it's just weird. But yeah, going back to that, yeah, I do suffer from depression. I have pretty profound, symptoms. It's not just like, I don't have suicidal thoughts, but I do have lose the motivation of doing things and stuff. And I do suffer from anxiety, and I do suffer from health anxiety, also known as hypochondria. And I used to suffer from panic disorder. I have like random panic attacks for no reason, and they're all pretty severe. If I were to compare them to you in the short sentence, it would be like Wesley from the movie Wanted. You know, I don't know if you guys seen that movie.
I have not.
Wanted? No? Oh, damn. So yeah, I mean, I have some pretty serious, anxiety attacks, but all that has like gotten better over time through therapy. Even medications have definitely helped, as well. And people are against, medications or whatever. Everybody has a right to their own opinion. But if you think that medications are like a white man's construct, and that we shouldn't be taking pills because they're there to depopulate us, then I'd say that's a very, conspiracy way on how to like, go about things.
That's a really paranoid way of looking at the world.
yeah. Not only that, there are like some indigenous even think about this, and this would kind of change your perspective on things, right? If you think that way, and it's like some modern medicines actually have indigenous herbal, properties. For example, bear root. Bear root was used a lot with like the Sioux and like the Lakota people, right? And that's actually the main ingredient in some, medicines when it comes to HIV. It treats HIV. It's that powerful, So a lot of those medicines that we actually have ourselves. Also, there's this book, and it's called a classical codex of 1552. Of like, and it's written by, or it's translated by William Gates, and that book basically talks about that book was basically written by a Mexica Tenochca. He called himself a physician because, like I said in the past, we had doctors, we had dentists, we had philosophers, we had therapists, and we weren't just savages or whatever, right? Priests and all, we had all that. So he was a surviving, doctor who survived the siege at Tenochtitlan, and he wrote a book, after he learned, how to write his language in like Latin letters, and he wrote a book. And in the beginning of the book, where it's giving introduction, because it was gifted to Mexico from the Vatican in the 90s as an anniversary or something like that. It was a gift that was given to Mexico, and anthropologists have been studying it. And turns out some of his herbal knowledge that he has, and those same plants that are native to Mexico, we've been studying them. We know that has anti-psychiatric, properties, meaning that the properties in those plants could actually treat, psychotic disorders like schizophrenia or any kind of manic or bipolar, disorders or whatnot. So it's very interesting, which is why it's very interesting to dig into that kind of history and really keep like a non-biased opinion when it comes to medications, because even that could be, an indigenous, type of plant that we're just overlooking, and we're just completely dismissing all that work by our own biases that was rooted in conspiracy theories. And a lot of those conspiracy theorists were spoke out about by or were brought up by white supremacists. But yeah, I'm kind of getting off topic here. I'm sorry, guys.
No, I mean, dude, that's some really good information. I mean, I didn't know a lot of that, so I'm sure our viewers really appreciate it. But for the record, at least me and Marcus, we're really against people that try to do this whole demonize white people, white man this, white man that. It just sounds ridiculous to me personally. Like, I don't use those types of lines on shit.
Yeah, I was going to add, Frey, that even I have family that also use Chinese herbs, and maybe there are some people that have that sort of Western perspective to believe that why should we use like herbs from Asia or China or whatnot, but a lot of them are actually are very good for us. They really help us a lot. So yeah, going back to what you were saying, like most medicine, like Western medicine's good.
For sure.
In certain doses. But yeah, that's really great, Frey, that you came a long way, man. And
yeah. Also, sorry if I cut you off, but I kind of want to like make a little point here. I saw someone's comment, and I just remembered, like, oh my god, this was a point, But so it's like therapy for me has really worked really well in various aspects of my life. Like anxiety, it definitely helped me, like ground myself while having high levels of anxiety or when I'm stressed out. Helped me cope with things, helped me cope with my intergenerational trauma, which is a very, prominent chain of colonialism that us indigenous people or the indigenous diaspora have been facing. Like for example, to me, what the definition of, according to my therapist, what intergenerational trauma means is like when someone along your ancestors or your family, who have been repeatedly or a part of this chain of like just abuse and them not knowing how to cope with it. They pass that on, like they learn that through their trauma by being traumatized or abused in their households. And when they don't unlearn that, actively, they pass it on to their children, and then their children pass it on to them, and it creates this cycle that we kind of like, see going on, because my father was abusive. He was hella abusive. He beat the crap out of me. If this wasn't, recorded, I would show you guys like how one of my bones is actually sticking out because he broke my ribs because he was mad at my aunt's spouse because my non-biological uncle was beating on my aunt, and he was really mad at that because the whole family thing, the emotional incest, or we got to protect our family, and instead of having to beat the crap out of the abuser, he beat the crap out of me. He saw me as a punching bag, and that's a pattern that I usually saw growing up as a child and as a teenager. And yeah, so it's like and I recognized how he grew up because he would tell me stories, and his brothers and my uncles told me how they raised him and they abused him really badly as well. They beat the crap out of him really badly, and he hasn't actively learned to unlearn that or cope with it. So he passed it on to me, and I received a lot of depression, from going through all that stuff. And I also have really I had a very very short fuse. Like any small little thing would just piss me off, and I'll go on a rage or a little rage episode and stuff like that. And I began to realize like this is intergenerational trauma. This makes me susceptible to coping with it in a very negative way, like picking up drinking or picking up smoking or picking up hard and heavy drugs. That's where a lot of this intergenerational trauma comes to place and takes a hold of us because we seek these addictions, like either blowing our money in a casino or doing these like negligent things or reckless things to cope with our trauma. And I believe therapy can definitely help us out with coping with our reality, coping with our pain, and for anybody who's also going through depression or anxiety, I mean, definitely recommend, if you live in California, I know we have a system that where if you're like meet or you make under about $70,000 a year, right, you can actually get free healthcare through Medi-Cal, through the California, medical system and stuff like that. It's not the best, but you could get, free medical care, for yourself and stuff like that. And it's worth just my word of advice is like keep trying different therapists, because like not every therapist is for you. It took me like about 5 different therapists to actually find therapists that actually recognizes the behavioral problems in a Mexican household with all the emotional incest, the abuse, the machismo, and all that stuff. So, and it's really important, and like it's going to be a challenging journey. I will say this, because you are basically unlearning, and you're fighting, 500 years, maybe 500 years of nonstop intergenerational trauma. But just to know that it's very rewarding, and that cycle stops with you. It ends with you, and it's a tough fight, but it's very rewarding. And yeah, man, it's just all about defeating the cycle, But yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. Sorry.
Thanks
No,
so much.
I'm really sorry you had to go through all that, man. But I'm glad to hear that therapy has helped you a lot. I always encourage people to go to therapy. I go to therapy myself. I don't feel comfortable saying for what, but I do. And it's really good. I mean, it's this common sense logic. If you had a physical ailment, you'd go to the medical doctor, right? The physical doctor to go get that taken care of. So if you have a problem, emotionally or with your life psychologically, of course you should go to the doctor as well. I mean, only good benefits will come from that. So, it's good that you mention all this because it takes that stigma away, right? It helps break that wall of stigma people have, that negative perception about therapy that you must be crazy if you go to therapy, which is asinine to think that way, but people still do.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. It's very contradicting because like if you think you're crazy for going to therapy, and that's the reason why you're not going to therapy, like shouldn't you go to therapy because you think you're crazy?
Yeah,
like,
that's
come on,
true.
bro.
Yeah, shouldn't you be getting treatment?
So you're on the West Coast, Cali guy.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
LA area, San Francisco area.
Yeah, so California, born and raised, right? I was
Okay.
born in East LA Hospital, also known as a very memorable hospital called White Memorial. I'm pretty sure a lot of people from East LA know that hospital. It's very deep in Boyle Heights. I was born in East LA, up, and I was there until the second grade. I moved out to San Bernardino area, and then I lived there for like 6 years, and then moved down to or moved back to LA, but in South Central, and that's where I grew up. And I eventually moved out of South Central, and now I'm in more south in Kumeyaay territory, also known as like San Diego area. So yeah, yeah. So LA
Okay.
dude,
LA, dude. Very cool. Yeah, I always was curious on what life is like growing up on the West Coast, man.
Oh
It's
really?
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm from the Midwest, and I grew up in Illinois most of my life, which maybe you know already. And it's been a trip, I'll say, but it's fun, you know. Growing up in an environment that especially is very different than where I was born. I was born in Lima, Peru,
Oh really?
but I don't have any, um, you know, memories of those because I was adopted like 6 months. But yeah, I was in California not too long ago. Yeah, well, a couple of years ago. I was in LA and San Francisco. So it was pretty nice. I remember I had made the mistake of going to San Francisco thinking it would be warm all the time and nice and hot. And I was going out one night and to meet a couple of friends, and I was like walking on the streets and oh my gosh, it was July too or August, and it was so cold. It was cold, man. I was like, okay, and I was in shorts. I had to go back and change into pants and to get like a jacket on. I was really surprised, but yeah, at least I like Los Angeles though. Um, but again, Frey, thank you again for sharing that with us. Uh, but wanted to move on a little bit more and maybe discuss a little bit about like what got you interested into the Mesoamerican history. Was it when you kind of like there's a certain point like when you realized you had Tlaxcalan ancestry, or was it like before that?
It
If you
was
don't
it
mind.
was it was it was long long before that, and there was a couple events that actually led up to that, and one of them being a big factor, ironically, is my father, my dad. Like I said, he was like I mentioned previously, he was like this like neo Mexica mindset, and he would always talk to me about like, Frey, you're Aztec, you're a real Mexican, and that he would talk to me about these stories of like different great warriors, like Tlahuicol or like the great, Tlatoani, who was like with many ambitions and many, occupations like Nezahualcóyotl and how we saw, and yeah, and like he would always feed me these stories as a child, and that just planted the seed, that's where all that comes from. And eventually it grew. And in high school, I was just more interested in it, because I kind of like, I don't know, I just didn't really like, a lot of the the school standard of teaching or whatever. And I just always like, I would fail most of my classes except history and English, so um, history always, and I was even correcting, the teachers sometimes, and having actual conversations with them, and they're really amazed, like, oh, dude, this guy knows his history, like shit, and then eventually, I dug more in depth into it. Like I started reading much more manuscripts, like the Codex Florentine, or like the history of the Chichimeca Nation, or the works of like the indigenous artists, like Análisis de Tlatelolco, and different other manuscripts that are within like the 16th century, early to like late, no, it's like the late 1500s, type of manuscripts. And that's when I started digging into that like recently, like about 2 years ago, when I learned about the Tlaxcalteca ancestry, and that we're not all Aztec, as Mexicans. And yeah, I think that's where those factors come from. Mainly, it was my dad. It's very important to like really put that seed in a kid's head, because eventually it'll grow and they'll start seeing patterns and it'll lead them back to reconnect. That's my hypothesis. And I actually have some like people who actually tell me the same thing, where someone planted a seed in their head, and somehow, some way, their culture has either helped them, like in difficult times, or they just grab like this urge of like, of enthusiasm for their culture and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. And, I thought I did ancestry DNA, and it showed that I had like ancestry in southern Mexico, and then it like switched to like Guatemala, that little like 2 or 3%, and now I'm like in El Salvador, Honduras. I was like, wait, no, I wanted to say I had DNA from like Yucatan, Quintana Roo area, but now it keeps that 3% keeps on switching to like certain places around the area, which is funny.
Yeah, as they
Ancestry
keep
DNA.
refining their algorithm and their reference populations, things change every year.
Yeah, it was crazy. I actually have a little crazy thing too as well. Like it's always a 1% I have. I have like a 1% because I have a DNA test as well. But I got a genetic test. It's from Ancestry, and yeah, they keep updating their search, and like it's always a 1%. I have like 1% of like indigenous Peruvian or indigenous Andean. And I'm like,
Hey.
where the fuck this come from? It's like what?
It's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, this is crazy. And like also for those of you who have done that as well, you could actually download, like literally go on your settings, and you could actually download the actual information, the data, from the researchers, right, of those companies. And you can actually upload them to a different website or a different agency, and like they'll actually dissect and look at your ancestry, and they'll compare your genetic results to different archaeological sites around the world. And I'm not gonna say that, but I am related, I guess, like 17 or 20% of that DNA or that specific genome or whatever. I'm related to like an archaeological site down there in Peru, in the Incan site or whatever. And I'm like, the hell, that's crazy. Then my wife got hers too, and like I did the same thing with hers, and like hers come back like she's related to some like archaeological sites, like from a king or whatever, and a royalty. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I didn't know you were married. That's cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, okay. Very cool. Neat. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that about that ancestry DNA with the archaeological aspect. That was really great of you. I wanted to move on to the social media really quick before we get into like the decolonizing path.
For sure.
What led you to want to be? I don't use these words lightly. Social media influencer. I guess you could say. I mean, a lot of people have like probably reached out to you and like thanked you for your videos and whatnot, and like how informational you are, and like TikTok and Instagram. So, what made you want to go out and about? Because I remember you just said earlier that you had anxiety, but now like here you are making TikTok videos, Instagram. I see you on there. So, yeah, just if you wouldn't mind explaining.
Yeah, for sure. No, dude. Like I guess you guys have noticed that I'm very open. I have no shame in talking about a lot of things. Yeah, dude. So it's funny because it's like I see that there's like a lot of new age distortion within like the Mexican indigenous or the Nahuatl diaspora, and I see that a lot of people. I'm not gonna mention any names, but a lot of their values are misplaced, or either they talk about history in a very biased perspective, and that led me to a place where I find myself in a position of constantly like complaining and getting on my phone. I'm like, no, that's wrong, and then I'm like, my wife would say like, why are you doing that? Like, why don't you make a video about it? And I'm like, you're right. So I was like, try to get the camera on there at first. Like I was really shy, had no equipment, and I have a stand like I have right now with a light. And I always wanted to like, talk about history because it's like I'm very passionate about it, right? And like I said, the seed of like Mesoamerican history was planted in my head at a very young age, and like I always had this intrusive thought where like I saw myself as a teacher, almost, right? And I think I might do that in the future when I pursue the career of like becoming an anthropologist and teaching probably anthropology or history in a college course in the future or whatever. But I always like fantasize about being a teacher or whatever, and since I have like a vast amount of knowledge, that I could, kind of point out there, and like I feel like I have some strong opinions that kind of like will have, hurtful conversations, but hopefully people realize that I'm coming from a place of constructive. But yeah, it's just that like there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I kind of want to be like just like clearing up a lot of misconceptions and just giving out a pure, non-biased opinion about history and stuff like that, and just spreading history because crazy enough that there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and a lot of that it's also coming from the diaspora where I come from, and like I just want to be at least like one voice, because I know that there's people out there who are also angered by a lot of the misconceptions and his biased opinions and stuff. So kind of want to be one of the first or one of the few that actually puts the truth out there and do things the right way. Talk about reconnecting in a very pure sense with values and stuff like that. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I remember I was a pretty shy kid, like back in high school and whatnot, well, sort of. So the fact that Juancho and I came this far is, or at least for me, I'm just like, wow, like I would not have done this like 10 years ago.
Yeah, me either, man. I'm very camera shy, dude. Like even to this day, like right now, dude, like I'm camera shy. Like, I'm nervous even before I came up here. I told you guys, heart was racing, like
Nah,
I was
man.
like, damn.
No reason to worry. On here, it's pretty good platform.
Juancho, were you ever a shy person or not really too much back in school?
I was kind of more like not really shy. I just like brooded all the fucking time back in high school. So I was like that type of guy.
Okay, I got you. So, Frey, I think getting into the main parts of this was like going on, your decolonizing path. You discuss three things: healing, reconnecting, and revolution. And you said you went through revolution first, if I'm not correct. In your video, yeah.
Oh, so, that's right. Yeah, the video I made.
Yeah, the video. So you said you went through an identity crisis, and I did too. Maybe a lot of us do, actually. For those of us that are on this path, because the path that maybe we were following perhaps doesn't make quite much sense. I can go on about that, but back to what we're talking about here. So at what point in time did you kind of go through this crisis, if you don't mind?
Oh, it was very early on, and to put a number on that, I think it would be like in 2014, 2012. And like that was when I was in high school, when I was trying to begin my reconnecting journey, and I think the real reason for that is because like for the indigenous diaspora, like we have this craving to reconnect to something, and we usually don't have the tools to reconnect, or we don't have the knowledge, like resources like genealogy, or some of us don't even know where our parents even come from, because that's a hard conversation for them as well, because my parents, they migrated from Mexico to the States and California. So and for other households, it's a hurtful conversation, because either they want to forget what happened down there, because either they're fleeing from violence, or whatever reason. It's very traumatic, and usually we don't know how to cope with that, so we just bury it, and we tend not to talk about it ever again as like bad taboo or something like that. So my mom was very secretive. She would just say, oh, we're just Mexican, and it made it really hard for me. So I had no guidance, no mentor, no nothing, no guidance on where to go, no direction. And my dad was a Mexica centric, neo Mexica, we're all Mexica and stuff like that, ideology. So it was a really bad identity crisis. It was really, really, really bad, like to the point where I was culture appropriating. There was a point in my life where I actually thought I was Apache, and that was shattered, but it was very early in my life, like in the high school stages of my life,
I find it interesting that you said so your dad was had this whole pro Mexica thing, but you said your mother was like really secretive about any indigenous background. So did they ever clash?
Oh, a lot, bro. A lot. They clashed a lot, and that led to a lot of trauma as well. Because so what's funny, dude, is that my dad came from Mexico City, right? Distrito Federal, Rio Churubusco, Agricola Oriental. That's my cat, and he was a city kid. He was a city boy. He was raised in the hood and everything like that, So you kind of already can make an assumption about his character. And my mom was a country girl. She is from Hidalgo, from a small town in Cotepec, the Hinojosa, and population maybe like 3,000 or something. Elevation in their pueblo is like 10,000 feet. They go out to a water hole every week or so to go pick up water and stuff like that, and they have to heat up their own water and stuff like that. So she didn't really tell me a lot of the genealogy that could have helped me out in reconnecting, and she was very secretive. Like she didn't want to talk about that because she had a big falling out with their parents. So she didn't know how to cope with that, so she didn't want to tell me. She didn't want to, I guess like relive that trauma or whatever. It was very like, touchy for her, touchy subject. So yeah, so she was very gatekept and secretive, and my dad would always make fun of her because she was from a small pueblo, and my dad wasn't. So typically, from a city boy, you would look down on somebody who's from a pueblo, right? You call them derogatory terms that like they're underdeveloped, or or especially if they're women, you hit them with like misogynistic, remarks, patriarchal remarks, stuff like that. And my dad would always call my mom, or he would make fun of her because the way she danced. She loved to dance, but when my dad was around, she would never dance around him because he would always make fun of her. And he would say, oh, que bailas como India, pinche bailes o pasos de indio. And in Mexico, for some of you guys that don't know, indio is like kind of like a derogatory term. It's a very bad slur out there. When you're doing something and someone calls you indio, it's like they're making fun of the way you do that certain subject. Like my mom was for dancing, right? And yeah, so even though my dad has indigenous ancestry and he's the one who has a Nawa, background, he was the one making fun of, someone from the actual pueblo. So, yeah, there were always butting heads,
Yeah.
and that contributed a lot to like my intergenerational trauma as well because they had such a bad relationship.
Yeah, I bet like you were talking about like going back and forth between like indigenous ancestry, not like your parents. Specifically, I wanted to bring up your mom really quick, and I feel like maybe that is quite common, perhaps, with a lot of Mexicans, like not wanting to talk about that.
I've heard that. I've heard that quite a bit from different people, where their parent,
Yeah.
like the parents or the grandparents, are secretive.
Yeah, secretive. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's sad, because
Yeah,
people
it really
should.
is. Sorry.
No, you're good. No worries. No, but I'm glad that at least here in the States we have people such as like you, Frey, and other people like Clear Bear or Zitlali or New Malta who make you want to be proud of your indigenous ancestry. So yeah, I have hope for the future on that. I wanted to go about speaking of like the video that you had said with the 15-minute video on your YouTube channel. You said that like maybe during this identity crisis we may seek like validation. Can you maybe answer like who are we seeking validation from?
Yeah, so my memory's a little distorted right now because I have
That's okay.
pretty bad memory. But so I think when I talked about, the validation, right, is like sometimes we tend to kind of seek someone to kind of like, or we kind of like, we would love to hear someone validate our indigenous identity, like it will be awesome if like, indigenous person north of the United States border to call us, indigenous, because that would mean a lot, because typically, they are the ones who have the card and everything, and they have their own social structures and everything like that. So it means a lot, to get validation from them, right? And I see that as a trend where a lot of us tend to seek, the validation, or we care about the validation of others, when in reality, that's a toxic mindset. We don't need validation from nobody other than ourselves, because as long as you're indigenous, you are indigenous, right? But that means separate from reconnecting, perspective. But yeah, like you just gotta, know that you're indigenous and recognize that, yeah, you're an indigenous person, and you know you don't need validation from anybody else. If someone tells you like any xenophobic comments like, oh, you're not indigenous because you're from Peru or because you're from Mexico, you're Spanish or whatever, don't pay attention to that, and don't judge their community as a whole based on that perception. Definitely voice out your opinions and let it be known that individual is doing that, but I would say don't definitely cause any division. But yeah, it's like some of us tend to kind of have this validation from somebody to kind of like validate us, our experience, when in reality, no, that comes from yourself. You look indigenous, your parents tell you you're indigenous, or you take a DNA test and the majority of your DNA is indigenous, then, or even if there's a percentage of that that's indigenous, I'm like, oh shit, It's like I belong somewhere, and you're valid, because you're part of something bigger,
So you've certainly, like Juanchelo and I, have dealt with people who have tried to, how would I say, erase our, not erase, but like change our minds that we're indigenous. We're like, no, you are not like native or indigenous, but the facts are there. Like it's indisputable that we are like, native to this lands, just like, any other indigenous person. Like a majority of my ancestry is from Peru, the Andean region. So, yeah, it can be an unfortunate situation from time to time. But like you said, just ignore them and move on from there. And that's Juanchelo, you're trying to talk and you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, okay, cool. Dude, no, like a lot of times they'll fucking say the same things over and over. I hear the same arguments being regurgitated every time. And every single person that makes these arguments think that they're like introducing some brand new concept to me. And I'm like, bro, I've already heard this shit 1,000 times. Like, so yeah, it's just kind of funny how there's some people that they're just dedicated to just trying to go after people and fucking sitting here and like saying you're not indigenous and blah blah. And so, there's a lot of people that that's all they feed off of, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I have a pretty hefty experience, when it comes to that. And there were even some snakes, right, in a close circle that were north of the United States border. They were either from the Navajo Nation or from, even the Cherokee Nation. They would invalidate, my experience, because they found out that I have, because I'm indigenous south of the United States border. And even a trend it's trendy right now, where like there's people like name drop, the Indigenous Voice, where he has some pretty hardcore views on what the indigenous, identity looks like, and it's that you have to have a treaty with your nation or whatever, and you have to surrender your United States, citizenship, and that's very extreme. And I can tell you that's a really big red flag. Don't definitely ignore what the hell he has to say, because that's coming from a sovereign citizen movement, extremist movement. So don't pay attention to those individuals. Just realize that they're coming from a place of ignorance. Ignore it. Know that you are indigenous, and that we were colonized by two different colonial powers, right? Spanish, and of course the British up there, and the United States. So it's like they're just like stuck in their bubble or whatever, and also don't really judge the whole community based off of that, because I have close friends who are Cherokee, and I have close friends who are from the Lakota Nation, from Pine Ridge, and they love Mexicans, and as a matter of fact, they have a strong relationship, together. But we could get into that in the future. But just ignore.
Shout out to Lakota guy for being a bro.
Yeah, for sure, and like you just gotta ignore them, man. They're coming from a place of hate. And it's a very important tool for some of you reconnecting natives that are out there. It's like when you're listening to somebody such as myself or anybody else, on any platform, social media platform, it's important to note or have this intellectual tool of to recognize where someone is coming from. If they're coming from a place of construction, and if they're delivering their message with respect, then that's maybe someone you should listen to. If they're coming from a place of ignorance and they're trying to disrespect or shame or using harsh words or slander, it's not the way to go. Don't listen to them, because if they aren't treating the diaspora with compassion, what makes you think that they treat themselves or their community with the same way? It's all about compassion, having to have compassion. I rarely talk about any of these like Jedi type mindset, but it's true. You can tell a lot where someone's values are at based off of the way they're compassionate about things, or where their compassion lies and stuff like that. So if someone speaks to you and that's very compassionate, that embraces you and stuff like that, and wants to teach you in a very respectful manner, and that's coming to you in a way that's constructive, even if it's a hurtful conversation, if they're coming from a place of construction, listen to them and hear what they have to say, especially if they're native speakers or if they're members of their actual communities, that you come from and that you have been disconnected from. So, they're like your siblings, so yeah. Kind of went on there. Sorry about that, guys. Again.
No, I liked it.
No, yeah,
that's what we wanted to hear.
Yeah, we like all these viewpoints. We like all this advice, man. So
the audience likes it too.
yeah.
I wanted to say to the audience, I know you guys are asking questions. We'll not wrap this up, but when we get done, if you could, and we'll say when we're finishing up, if you could maybe post your questions again, because I know you guys asked some good questions, and we just want to take down this good part of the interview, and yeah, we'll get on to that. Frey, I wanted to go about talk about the reconnecting in depth, and that being and we kind of talked about this earlier, and that was thoughts on those not believing that we can reconnect, and we kind of discussed that we should be what's what I'm looking for, accepted by people that want to deny that we are indigenous to these lands. I mean, again, going back to that is indisputable. Now, I think that perhaps one reason as to maybe why certain people might be hesitant or not want to say that is because maybe they think that we're trying to speak over others from communities, which I've said in previous videos. That's not what I want, and that's not what Wanchaloa wants. I'm sure that's not what you want, and many others that are also reconnecting natives as well. I think that having recognition is what we would like to have, and I think within time we'll get to that point. But yeah, just showing that we mean no harm, and again, trying to speak over others or get benefits of any sort. That's not what I want. But yeah, and then the second part that I wanted to talk about was in your video, your recommendations for reconnecting natives was having access to genealogy and going through that. So my question for you is for those that don't have access to their records or were adopted, how would you say for a reconnecting native to go about this journey? If that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. It does 100%.
Okay. Cool.
And I understand the question. But see, the thing is here is that I that's a pretty big situation, so I wouldn't have any actual advice to someone in that situation who's been adopted or who has no access to their genealogical records, because I'm not in that position, and I'm not a professional genealogist, even though I am studying genealogy and I'm taking courses for that as well. But I'm not at that point to give big credible advice for that field. But I definitely would say reach out to other people from who either my mic is on. Okay, good. Other people who are in the same position or in the same situation, and get their advice and always get second opinions on what you can do, to kind of reconnect to your tribe and stuff like that. And I mean, I just don't know, for indigenous folks who are adopted, and I feel like that's a pretty serious, situation where one is placed on themselves, or that's been placed on them, because I'm not sure if even their own original name was stripped off from them, because if you could have a last name in Mexico, Mexican genealogy is it's studied to a T. There's literal books of regions who have documented families, moving around, tracking the migration patterns. So so if they at least have a last name, or the original name, they could possibly, find, what family they come from and stuff like that. So that's a very hurtful position to put someone in, especially someone of indigenous, descent, because we come from communities. We're community-based people. We thrive together. We do things together. There is no leader. There's leadership, but there is no one king or emperor or speaker, unless you're elected, as a speaker for your community. But we're very community-based, and we've been living like that for perhaps maybe even thousands of years. And we crave to be part of a group. We claim to be part of a community. And to be stripped from that is pretty traumatic. So I wouldn't really have any great advice to someone who's in that position, but someone who may have does not have access to their genealogy, like resources. I could definitely give some advice, on that aspect, but when it comes to adoptees or people who've been adopted, that's something I don't know. And if I were to give experience about that and act like I have the answer to that, it would be like kind of harmful because I'm taking away the space of someone who actually has that information. Yeah.
Sure. No worries. I really did appreciate your answer. So, your response. And I'm not saying that because I'm adopted. I was just mostly asking because I was very genuinely curious about that. But yeah, thanks again for that response. Then my other question was, I'll skip number 3, but for 4 is like you brought up in your video about like how certain people like to romanticize our history. Could you maybe give an example of the romanticizing, please?
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Yeah. And the reason why I laugh is because it's not the question. It's actually like the history I have behind the question. Because you see, like people in my community, right? Particularly, within the Nawa communities, it's like we know the truth, right? Because it's we have people who study the history to a T, and even professionals, anthropologists who study this to a T. And they usually, like a native speaker said it in one of my lives. He said that indigenous people tend to poke fun at some of these concepts, that are just fake, like these fake New Age distortions. But anyways, yeah. So one example of romanticization of history is like for example, the Mexica or just the nations within Central Mexico, where people think that it was all peaceful, we were all living in harmony until the Spaniards arrived and destroyed everything. The Fire Nation arrived and all went to crap.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's not the case. Central Mexico, maybe all of Mesoamerica, was home to warrior cultures. Chichimecas, the Huastecas, the Tunacas, the Mexica Tenochcas, the Tlaxcaltecas, even those in Michoacan, the Purépechas, even the Mayans, we were all warrior cultures, and we weren't ashamed of that. So saying that we were all hippies and all this like kumbaya, it's like it's false, it's fake, because we were a warrior culture, like, and they weren't ashamed of that. And yeah, that's an example of like romanticizing history, or even there's contemporary, romanticization, like where people will romanticize, indigenous medicines like peyote, and like they or like they think that when you go down to a pueblo, Mexico, you will receive this grand knowledge, and that you're gonna like, basically be enlightened, and that all your issues in your life will be resolved by reconnecting to your people, when in reality that's not the case. Sure, there's like psychedelics that have its things, but in reality the pueblos down there, they could probably be suffering or be in the same position as the communities up here, where they're poor, they don't have access to clean water, or they're trying to fight against local Mexican officials from stopping mining companies to come in to their place and take away their lands, and they're protesting that because Mexicans have, or indigenous Mexicans have been stripped from their land rights. So yeah, the romanticization of history is pretty, it's pretty messed up, and it's very damaging, because like you're kind of like going into like this mystical thinking, and you're not focused on reality. You're becoming detached of reality of how things actually were. And when you look into history, your whole reality will just be shattered, and it's a hurtful conversation. So it's best to like look at history with a non-biased opinion, and not think that way.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving that really detailed response. Did I see your cat again?
Oh yeah.
Did it just go by?
Yeah, dude. She sees when I'm. Yeah. Her name
Oh,
is Stephanie. It's a
hello,
calico.
Stephanie. Oh, it's a pretty cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have been like asking me like locally where I live. They see my cat and like how much you want it for, you know. That's not my cat. But apparently calicos are very like they're seen as like royalty or whatever. Like it's like wealthy type of pattern cats. Like a lot of people tend to buy them. You know. What's up,
Yeah,
Melissa?
I like cats. They're
Yeah,
pretty
me too.
cool.
I'm a big cat
Chill.
person.
Yeah, nice. But yeah, again, it was a really great, detailed response, Frey. Thank you. I think we just wanted to move on quickly to, the revolution And my question to you is like, what do you want to see for those natives that are reconnecting, like in the future for us?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely, dude. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, like from reconnecting natives, it's like nobody's asking you to be like a powerhouse and to like know your very detailed history, like what did Montezuma eat for breakfast every day, type of thing. It's
Mhm.
like just be respectful, be mindful that there are boundaries in place, and make sure you're not overstepping any boundaries and be disrespecting anybody, because when we're disconnected, right, and we are reconnecting natives, we don't know the social structures because like colonialism and systems in place that kind of make it hard for us to do that, you know and so we're disconnected, so we're not really aware from of the social structure of like our communities, and so it's important to reach out to those communities and get to know some of those social structures, so that way we won't be disrespectful and stuff like that. Get to learn some indigenous values, and just basically be mindful, of like of how you're approaching your reconnecting journey. Just be very mindful, and always be aware. And I'm really concerned for reconnecting natives because it's like there's a lot of grifters, like Iron Jacket. There's this new guy grifter going around by the name of Aztec Lakota, who's calling himself a self-proclaimed shaman, and he's another grifter like a Iron Jacket who thinks he could heal people through a phone, you know, and people will buy into that. And when you're reconnecting, to be very frank, you're in a position where you are gullible. You don't know what to believe in, because sometimes, or most of the times, you don't have somebody there giving you these intellectual tools to help you out in your reconnecting journey. So you just buy into things, and it's perfectly fine to make mistakes. My fellow reconnecting natives, it's perfectly fine. You can make mistakes. You know, it's a road of mistakes, and you learn. And people like myself or other, indigenized people who are reconnected, they will treat you with respect, and those that don't treat you with compassion or respect, don't listen to them. Ignore them. Always get a second opinion. Go, if this person wasn't for you and he's disrespectful, move on. Move on to another native speaker. Move on to another person. And always be mindful and always ask questions, reconnecting natives, and use these tools that I talked about, for your toolkit, your intellectual toolkit, use those things, so that way you won't be put in a position of harm, or you won't be in a position where you'll fall into a cult, because cults are serious, and some cults, have like cultural appropriation where they use some indigenous, aspects and stuff like that. So you don't want to be part of that, because once you realize you're in a cult, it's too late, you know. And so, yeah, just be mindful and be careful. I actually am concerned that this genuine. Like, I'm really concerned for reconnecting natives. Which is why I'm starting to like that's why I kind of made that video as well, and I want to make more videos like that, so that way I can kind of like put the tools in the hands of reconnecting natives, so that way they know what direction to go to and not fall for these scams and stuff like that. But that's pretty much where I stand with reconnecting natives, and what I kind of like wish for them, not want from them, because that's kind of egotistical, I guess, or kind of like weird or angry. But that's what I kind of want for them, is to like have tools to navigate around their journey and stuff like that, so that way they won't fall into the bad hands or bad people to take them in. But yeah.
That was an excellent response. Thank you, Frey,
Thank you.
for that. Because there's a lot of people
Perfect.
that are on this journey. There's a lot of people that follow, this channel that, really are trying to, reconnect in some way or another. Trying to drop this like, Eurocentric view of ourselves, particularly from like maybe looking at us as mestizos at one time, and maybe doing a little bit more research, and we are more than that. But yeah, I think ready for the brain picking question. Ready to pick your brain. All right, man.
All right.
So I had seen your video. I really liked it a lot. And again, this is more so a question than not so much contention. Believing that we see someone as native. Now, you had said that, like, and other people have said this too. So my
Yeah.
question kind of goes to this: is that, even if like someone is 1/16 native, they can be native. And my question to that is, like, say for example, like Rios Montt, the guy from Guatemala, or perhaps like the person that insulted Yalitza. You know who I'm talking about. Obviously, Yalitza, but she had suffered some, like, not suffered, you could say suffered, but like some racist commentary from some guy in Mexico, who insulted indigenous people, talking, joking about them like being, servants, maids and whatnot. Um, those people, such as them, perhaps like have like a far distant indigenous ancestor, even if they are mostly not native.
Yeah,
Like,
they would probably be
in
5 to
Indiana.
15%, might be
Oh,
5 to 15% native, if anything, right?
well, yeah, but but
Yeah.
if they have like some distant ancestor, like native ancestor, is it fair? Like, would you consider them like native? I personally mean, like, I wouldn't, even if they have that distant ancestor, because I don't want to consider people that say those things native whatsoever. So I'm just curious on like your thoughts on the 116. Now, like, culturally, like practicing culture. I mean, that's fine, but like, I think saying it like that I am is a different thing. So yeah, I'm just curious on your response.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So just to kind of like reinforce, to see or to verify whether I understood your question right. So if there's someone who has either distant or very close indigenous ancestry and they are insulting an indigenous person and holding up this like, like opposing indigenous, mindset, will I still consider them indigenous?
Yeah, or like the person that, you live here in the U.S. and you always hear about like the guy that says like, oh well, I have a great 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 Cherokee ancestor or something, the Cherokee princess thing, so I can say what I want,
Yeah,
But
okay.
let's say legitimately they do have it, or a Wabo, who says like, y'all are Siberians, we're the real natives, and like he does have like a distant, far off like native ancestor, like those people.
Yeah, for
I don't
sure.
know.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I understand. Yeah, like those who have that ancestry but aren't really very much connected or whatever.
the
Yeah, I
distant.
really wouldn't. They would lose their indigenous card, this like
Sure.
the hypothetical indigenous card, you would call them like that. Yeah, they're just basically not indigenous anymore because if you're going to be having that mindset of a white man and oppressing your fellow indigenous peeps while you are still having indigenous ancestry that's very distant, it's like I actually met Cherokees who are 116, or an eighth. And let me tell you, boy, these guys are like more native than the actual dark skinned, natives and stuff like that, And like he's out there like living, he's out there camping out with just nothing but a blanket, sleeping on the cold and stuff like that, hunting turkeys and stuff like that, living on an 80-acre property and stuff like that, And it's like blood quantum is like, it's pretty much irrelevant, But if that same dude were to be like insulting the indigenous community, yeah, he wouldn't be seen as indigenous anymore because it's like, why are you doing that? You're now thinking like a white man, and that just completely invalidates, his whole thing because it's like, you see, when it comes to being indigenous, it doesn't really matter based off your color. It matters based off of like, your community and your views and your values on your community, and if you're accepted by your community, and like, if those are valid and still, like and good terms with those things, then you are indigenous, regardless of how light you are, regardless of how dark you look, or how distant your ancestor is. It's all about being accepted by your own community because reconnecting or being indigenous is more than just having a card or whatever. It's about community. There's you, or I guess myself, right, as an example, the disconnected, and then there's a community. My value is towards the community, so I have to, reconnect with them and learn their values and be respectful. The second I am respectful and lose those values and disrespect my own community and my own people, my own diaspora, dude, they're not gonna want me there anymore. So therefore, yeah, I lose my indigeneity. I'm not seen as an indigenous or part of their crew anymore. I'm seen as a white man because I'm oppressing my own people, in that sense. And I believe those people do have a duty to like fulfill, to like learn their values. And but I would definitely, say that they're not doing that because they're throwing insults at Yalitza. I think I did see Yalitza comment section. One of them said that, oh, she belongs in a place where she supposed to make quesadillas de flor de calabaza, which is like quesadillas of like a squash flour. They're really good, by the way. I've made them earlier. It's like that's just xenophobic. And if that person has indigenous ancestry, yeah, you're no longer valid, bro. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, you're basically this like Europeanized indigenous person. Like, you shouldn't be insulting people like that. Especially if you come from that community. And that goes again. Like, don't listen to people who are coming from a place of ignorance. Just ignore them. It's like their comments have no power over you other than, and when they do have power over you, it's when you react in a certain way. When you just dedicate your time and become so obsessed with that individual, is like you let that person consume you. You let that person have control over you by the way they reacted, by the way you reacted to them. So you can't let that take control over you. And like I said before, a tool, they're coming from a place of ignorance and disrespectful, you ignore them.
Yeah. I see you have a dog too.
Yeah, I do have a dog. Yeah, you guys heard that?
Yeah, I heard a small dog barking.
No, we appreciate your answer. We wanted to see your viewpoints on that. I did also, but I wanted to make our subscribers knowledgeable because like I've run into it where some people get surprised with me and my viewpoint at least sometimes. So the way I see it is there's two ways. There's like two separate matters with being indigenous. One is the racial aspect and one is the ethnic. And obviously, any nation has the right to accept somebody at any percentage and say that they're a member of that nation. That's their sovereign right. But whenever I think of it in terms of the race, I would consider it the same logic somebody would use with any other race. So I have 4% African ancestry. I have like 52 African ancestors I found through genealogy, but I can't go and say I'm a black man because I'm not physically a black man. So I would say the same thing. I would have the same view with the Amerindian Native American thing. I would say at some point, DNA wise, you're no longer that racially speaking. You can still be a member of a community, and that, that's not what I'm invalidating. That's not, you're still a member of that community regardless, if they accept you. Well, what I'm talking about is more like the racial aspect. Is I don't really consider somebody that I would say 15% to be racially native. If they're 85% white, they're just pretty much a white person. If they're a member of a nation, great. They can be Cherokee. They're still that, right? That doesn't validate anything. But that's just the way I look at it, because otherwise, the way I see it is if you have somebody that's like mostly a Criollo and they have one far off native ancestor and they have a little bit of indigenous DNA, I don't really think it's beneficial to say they should be natives too, when historically them and people like them have oppressed indigenous peoples and have considered themselves white anyways and superior because of their lighter skin tone, because they're predominantly European. So that's I wanted people to know that. That's my viewpoint. You can say that I'm pro BQ and all that crap, but I mean, that's just my viewpoint. I don't necessarily subscribe to BQ in the sense of that I think you need to have like a certain percentage from a specific tribe. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying I think people be racially native should have enough, like a good amount of native DNA. And I would say, me personally, my opinion would be like 25% or something. But that's just my viewpoint, and I'm just throwing that out there so the subs aren't like thinking that something's up or like getting surprised randomly, and then it'd be like, oh, well, Juan, what you think this? It's like, no, here it is. I've thought this. I'm sure we've been kind of clear on previous videos, but I'm throwing that out there because I've gotten some people that have gotten upset with me on TikTok and shit. So for the record, just set it straight right here.
Also, we have to forget to watch out for Chief Butterknife. Do you remember that video?
You really brought up Chief Butterknife. That's crazy. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because his mindset is also pretty sick. For those of you who don't know who Chief Butterknife is, why am I even calling him Chief Butterknife? He's just a pro Labo guy who says some pretty disrespectful things about indigenous people, and it's just a really bad mindset. I won't go into too much detail, but yeah. Frey, thanks for giving your response. was a well thought out response. Oh, you're ready for that.
Yeah, he had a really good response, man. I mean, even if we don't agree completely on everything, no harm done. You know, I like it. I like it when we could show that, hey, even if we got disagreements, we can still be very civil on it. You know,
Yeah.
not everyone's going to agree on every single little point. So I still respect your viewpoint.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, me too, definitely. I likewise as well. You know, I don't criticize you or anything like that. You know, and I would definitely see why there's a lot of people upset. You know, because a lot of people definitely are like, you know, very against blood quantum, and they want everything nothing to do with blood quantum at that point. And they have every right to feel the way they do, and you have every right to your opinion. You know, and yeah, I mean, it's just like yeah, we could definitely have opposing views, but still for the same cause. You know, it's like it's a relationship. You know, it's like even though you guys like have opposing views, we're still for the same cause and we're still in the same fight. You know, so.
Yeah, we're still allies, because I've seen this with some people in the past that have been very black and white, where they're like oh well, you know, some of the guests you have on, you guys don't agree 100% with those guests. So why are you still associating with them? And some people that support us have gotten mad that we associate with people that don't 100% agree with us. And it's like, bro, you're hardly going to find a person that's going to 100% agree with you on every single little thing. That's not realistic.
Exactly.
At all. And that's extremely immature mindset to have the whole like, oh, well, since they don't agree with me and everything, I'm just going to disassociate. You're going to walk through life alone if you do that.
Yeah. And I was also going to say, I appreciate your honesty as well. Because there's a lot. I had a lot of friends like previously when I spoke before I went on here, you know, they would talk behind your back. You know, I would appreciate someone who was very front and honest with me and very blunt, rather than somebody who disagreed with me with everything and then just like, you know, talk all this smack behind my back and stuff like that, and eventually learn to that'll lead to a train wreck, you know, in a relationship. But yeah, and it's honestly being honest is a very healthy, you know, or essential aspect of having a healthy work relationship or anything, you know. It's very good to have that and address that, you know. And definitely in my generation, I'm Gen Z, if anybody cares, you know, we definitely have this habit of like crucifying anybody who doesn't really agree 100%, you know, and like yeah, it's kind of you know, like kind of not all that great, you know, to crucify somebody just because they don't really agree with you, you know. I have friends who don't agree with me with like certain aspects of spirituality or whatever, and that's perfectly fine, you know. Definitely overlook all those little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Anthony Perez, people on TikTok don't know how to respectfully disagree. Yeah, you're right on point right there. They don't. But yeah, they made it seem like I had like blasphemed or something when they figured out like my stance. They're like, I'm gonna make sure everyone knows about your stance, Monchelo, and I'm like, I'm not hiding it. Like people fucking know this shit. Like I don't know what you're talking about.
Honestly, people on Reddit can get more aggressive.
Oh, dude, I hate Reddit, man. It's so toxic.
Reddit. People on Reddit can get hostile. You've been on Reddit, Frey?
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I go to Reddit for everything, bro. Everything. It's crazy. Yeah, you're right, dude. They can get pretty hostile.
When Monchelo and I first like started, we were on like Reddit trying to get people to like, you know, check us out, and yeah, we got some hostile.
That shit was funny because they would go after me or whoever posted, and then I'd be like, Marcus, I'm like, go up, put my comments, dude, it'd help. That shit was so funny.
Have to come in. But yeah, just moving right along here. Frey, just a couple more things here. And like, do you have any like favorite parts of Mesoamerican history? Like maybe one. Like what's your like?
Oh, dude.
Thing?
Yeah, man. Yeah. This is outside of my culture boundaries, but I highly like, you know, the history of the Chichimeca people, you know, and there's this one, you know, event, the Gran Chichimeca War, right, where they went to war with the Spaniards for like 40 years and made literally the Spaniards, you know, surrender, right? And I think it's funny because if you look into the Chichimeca people, you know, they were ruthless. They were feared by all the Nahua nations. They were feared by everybody because they were so astounding warriors, you know. And here come these Spaniards, you know, thinking that they're superior and stuff like that, and their tin can armor, you know, looking like Sprite cans and shit. And like
Sprite cans.
they go into this 40-year-long war with people they think that are inferior to them. They're charging in a battle, butt naked, because they prefer to fight naked, body paint everywhere, And that war lasted for 40 years, and that nearly bankrupted New Spain, and that forced, Spain to recognize the power of the Chichimex people and actually give them their own, sovereign state, eventually. And it's also one of the reasons why, like, homophobia doesn't really make sense to me, because it's like you have people literally charging butt naked, with their wee-wees out. Maybe even with the boner, because, when you're in a state of adrenaline charging in a battle, possibly having a boner, Nobody wants to fight a man with a boner, If you weren't so homophobic, you probably would have won,
No, so yeah, my Guachil ancestors they played a huge part in the Chichimeca War. So yeah, I got a lot of the documented Guachil ancestry. But yeah, they were extremely badass. Some of them were less clothes. Others had coyote skins on, and they had that type of wear. So, but they weren't as armored up as the natives of Central America, like the Tlaxcalans or the Aztecs, because you guys did have armor. That cotton armor that was reminiscent of a European gambeson. It's pretty effective stuff.
Yeah, dude, I actually wanted to go ahead and ask you after all this is like, where'd you get that Ishkawipili? I actually want to get one of those and decorate it.
I got it from this guy named Arsenas Rincon or something like that. I can give you his information. He let's see, how much did he charge me? I think it was like all together with the shipment and everything. It must have been like $150 to $200. Pretty good.
Really, dude?
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty good, man.
Yeah, I had to go tape measure like my shoulders and my waist, all that stuff, and he made it himself. So it was pretty awesome. I told him to make it as thick as possible to make it as like realistic as to what they wore back then. So, but yeah, he can customize. He can have different like colors on there and shit. So I just wanted to get the plain white one because I thought it looked cool shit. Anyways.
Yeah. I actually have, like, if I get one, I actually have pretty big plans for it, because I'm digging into like some like pre-colonial practices, or just like arts, craftsmanship, because they're still alive to this day in Mexico, and yeah. So yeah, dude, I really appreciate that. I'm gonna go reach out to him, and
yeah,
that doesn't sound bad, dude. That doesn't sound bad at all.
No, it would. Yeah, and like, and look, I mean, you're helping somebody in Mexico. That kind of money for somebody in Mexico is quite a bit. So,
yeah.
Let me I'm gonna drop. You know what? Because somebody just asked for it. Here, let me see if I can drop his. Here, I'm gonna send it to you here in this private chat, his Facebook link, and then I guess I'll go ahead and send it to, because I mean he has this public profile anyways. This is the guy that I ordered my my Ishkapili from. So you guys, I just posted the link. You can reach out to him, send him a DM, and he can make you some stuff. It's pretty good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Trey, I was going to ask you one last couple parts here. Last few parts is exposing like myths, made about Mesoamerican history. Was there like one that like specifically stuck out to you? That's
man.
like, oh, come on, I'm calling BS on this right now. Like the whole, like for me, mine is like, and I don't believe this, like Columbus, like coming to, I believe, Central America on his second or third voyage. And he said that because the moon aligned with the stars or everything, he was able to persuade like these natives that he was God or like some God, and everyone like bowed down to him. And I was like, oh, come on. I don't believe that for a second, because he was, let me go into more detail about this. Like he only had like a few Spaniards with him at the time. And there was like so many natives there because he was on the freaking continent. And he was like, I guess it was like nighttime, and he knew like natives were coming, and he had his translator there, and he said like tonight will be like an eclipse, I believe. And it was an eclipse, but he obviously knew about like science a little, and he knew that would happen. And then like all the natives got like scared and whatnot. But I don't know. I find that very hard to believe, because I know the Spaniards made up lies about us. So I'm just curious on what your biggest myth you'd like to dispel.
Yeah, definitely, dude. Man, there's a lot of them, dude. A lot of them. I've also dedicated some of my time to dispelling some myths on my TikTok account and Instagram. I should move into YouTube more, but anyways, there's a lot of them. One of them I mentioned earlier about the whole, we were all this like in harmony, Avatar, pre-Fire Nation type of society. But one of them would have to be what's one of them was like human sacrifice, right? Where people thought that human sacrifice didn't exist, right? Because that was just a thing for Europeans to justify, them colonizing and conquering, right? When in reality, they really didn't need any kind of like justification because they already had that before they arrived in Mexico, and the sources that people claim that the only reason why we don't have human sacrifice, or the reason why we don't have, or the reason why human sacrifice didn't exist is because a lot of the sources that say human sacrifice is to be depicted is in post-colonial, manuscripts that we thought were written by the Spaniards and whatever. But no, just to mention a few, the Codex Florentine. The Codex Florentine mentions, human sacrifice. And in chapter 12 of the Codex Florentine, there's a story during the siege of Tenochtitlan, right, with the Spaniards and the Tlaxcalan allies that the Spaniards and indigenous allies, they were camped out on a causeway and going towards Tenochtitlan. And in this encampment, the Mexicas raided, the Spanish encampment, and they managed to take away like hundreds of indigenous, allies and about a couple or maybe even a lot more of indigenous Spaniards as well, along with their horses. And it was raining and they were slipping and sliding everywhere. So the Mexicas, the Mexica Tenochtitlan, they had an advantage. So they managed to round them up and walk them along the pyramid steps. And the story goes that they were all being sacrificed in a single file line, and they were being sacrificed on the stone. And then they decapitated them, and they strung their skulls. Like they put a wooden rack through, or a wooden pole through their skulls, and they'll put that, like a kebab looking human skulls things on a rack, and they called it a zumpani, and they put it on the east where the Spaniards were able to look at, their indigenous allies, their horses, and their decapitated Spaniards, on this rack. And people say that was just a myth. It's just an exaggeration. It's not real. But they found it. They actually found evidence of that same skull rack in Mexico. Not only that, that skull rack that they found was in the pre-colonial, times, an actual human skull rack. Not only that, but also a circular tower of skulls, nothing but human skulls, and a wall behind it of human skulls that was strung with wooden poles. Also there is also pre-colonial evidence in the manuscript, and I think it's called the Codex Laude, folio number 44 or page 44 in the Codex Laude. It's a pre-colonial codex, and they depict human sacrifice. And page 44 or folio 44 is where you see the human sacrifice, taking place, and they even found like blood samples and certain, ritualistic, places like this, like the sacrificial stone and stuff like that. And also you have accounts, and some of these post-colonial codexes were actually written by indigenous, people. Like for example, the Codex Florentine, a lot of that credit towards who wrote that book goes to the Spaniard, Bernardo de Sahagún, when in reality it wasn't really him that was compiling all this stuff. It was actually his four Nahuatl interpreters who were actually citizens of Tlatelolco, who were also Mexica as well, and they would go out and they would interview their elders and the people who lived in the pre-colonial era and who lived through the siege, and have their oral accounts and compile all this and record a lot of their knowledge and put it in all this. But the reason why we think or have this biased opinion about it, that we think that this was written by a Spaniard, is because the translated version, because the book was first finished in Nahuatl, the indigenous language, right? And later, a couple years later, it was translated into Spanish. But when it was translated, it wasn't really like, it wasn't translated on the actual, definitions of the words. So it's a little bit distorted. But if you were to actually read, like in Nahuatl, you will find that it'll say something completely different. So yeah, the human sacrifice thing, it's something that's highly, controversial, and people think it never happened. People even think on those sacrificial stones that they weren't sacrificing nobody, that was just a place where you would lay back, and instead of them ripping your heart out, you would just meditate. It was a meditation chamber. Some people say, and it's just like, it just goes back to erasing the history of Mesoamerica, that we were these Jedis, that we could never harm a fly or whatever, and and it's like, no, bro, like, Central Mexico is home to the most hardcorest, warriors. We were major warrior cultures, that lived in Central Mexico, and I think we should see pride in that, and we shouldn't care. We shouldn't care what a white man says. Like in an argument, typically a white man would say, or a colonizer mindset person would say, "Oh, but your people were sacrificing people here." But yeah, so was the church. So what? It's human history, So yeah, I went on a little rant there, but yeah, that's one of the things that I was like, dude, it's so stupid,
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that response, man. Thank you. That was a very good myth to dispel. I guess I had one other, like, kind of not so much a brain pick question, for like too hard to think of, but like me and a friend were talking about like how maybe a lot of codexes are possibly like, they could be like hidden. Like, do you think like Spaniards are like keeping a lot of like important information regarding like Mesoamerican history, like, or the Spanish government might, or possibly like the Vatican that hasn't even been like released? Like, do you think like some really important stuff was like hauled over to Spain like during the earlier like colonial years that hasn't been like returned back, that could really help us more with like finding out about our history?
100%.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, all these codexes that we know of today, Codex Mendoza, or the 115 Classic Codex of 1552, written by that Mexica Tenochca physician, all those things were all found. They were found not even in the last century. They were found in like the 1900s. History of the Chichimeca Nation, that was a journal written by Don Fernando de Alba y Sisochi, who captured the history and the chronicles of like, the Chichimeca elders or people of that time period, right after getting off of the 40-year war of the Grand Chichimeca War. Those things were kept in the private collections of people. Now, this is where some people don't realize, is that when the 12 friars arrived to Mexico, they did something called the burning of the idols, and in the Codex Florentine, or I think in the book of Historia de Tlaxcala, written by Diego Camarso, Diego Muñoz Camarso, who was a Tlaxcalan chronicler, he records, the burning of the idols, where they saw everything that have to do with like indigenous idols in Central Mexico was all put in the center of Mexico City, and you will rip out, idols or wooden things or anything. Even codexes, pre-colonial codexes, were all burned in the center of Mexico City, and it said that fire burned for 8 days. But there were surviving pre-colonial codexes that were landed, that were sent to the King of Spain before that. So before the burning of the idols, a lot of books were sent to the King of Spain as treasures, for the king, or just treasures for the king, But eventually, after one king after the other, or royalty, those books were actually found in private collections of people. And certain even pre-colonial codexes were actually found. Like there's one pre-colonial codex known as the Codex Borgia that's really popular to this day. That book was actually found by accident. Somebody came in and wanted to get this book appraised by an anthropologist, and they looked at it and they said, "Oh wow, like how old did you say this book was?" "Oh, like 50 years old." "No, this is a 500-plus-year-old book. Like, you have a remarkable piece of history here." And the person said that, "Oh, well, we just had it around, babysitting the kids, play with it and everything like that. It was ripped up." So yeah, there's a lot of codexes that we don't even know of. Like I said, the Classical Codex of 1552, written by that Mexica Tenochca physician, that was gifted to Mexico by the Vatican. And there's codexes that are, like that I believe that are still in the private collections of people that we just don't know of, And even Don Fernando de Alba y Sisochi also records that he had access to numerous books and numerous manuscripts that were written, that were really highly inaccessible at the time, and he had access to those books because of his mixed heritage. He was half indigenous and half Spanish, and he had access to that big library. But that library was transferred in the hands of someone else, and then eventually the ownership of that library is like lost. So we still haven't found a library. We're wondering, where did the library go? That has all those manuscripts. So it's like the mystery is still there. That's the grand mystery. And me, this is my conspiracy theorist, coming back, at front of at center, at attention, is like saying like, Frey, there's some of these books are in the freaking, they're in the private collectors, man. It's like, yeah, I kind of have I sympathize for that. I know that there's some books out there that we don't know of that have critical information that are in the hands of private collectors because, it's collectible thing, egotistical stuff. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I always wonder that too. Like, especially when I had that conversation with my friend, like they found like some artifact or something in the Vatican that the Vatican had. So there's definitely a lot of information I think that is being kept from us regarding like artifacts, codexes, and whatnot, and hasn't been returned, or they don't want to return it. And I say they, as in probably like the Spanish government or the Vatican. So I don't know. I mean, shoot, there's probably like tons of our artifacts, like indigenous artifacts, spread all out through Europe, perhaps even further away. But I think we'll uncover more as time goes on.
Yeah, I usually have this thought where I think like this like Russian, mafia member or the head of the Russian mafia probably has like his own personal office, and he has this like side in his office where he has on display like this like ancient codex that nobody has seen, that he likes to flex on people with, right? So it's so yeah, that stuff kind of goes through my mind sometimes.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So move on to the final part here, and
Yeah.
I guess my question was, you got any hobbies?
Oh,
Your favorite
yeah.
hobbies?
Yeah,
That's right.
dude. I do have hobbies, man. I sometimes, like to like just be active, like practice. I'm recently getting into martial arts again. So that's a hobby. I also like to craft things. I'm a very crafty person. I also
Yeah.
got a cricket, a Kirkut Cricket Explorer right here, right on my desk and stuff like that. I like to like redesign. I'm getting into like, redesigning some like pre-colonial textiles, you know, from like the Indigenous Centro Mexico, and like I would like to kind of like redesign some of those things and stuff like that, and also do a lot of research on like that's one of my hobbies, just like reading like manuscripts and stuff like that, getting to know more context of like pre-colonial history, and I have this pretty like obsessment of like kind of like revitalizing, or at least like keeping alive this like indigenous uh feather work called amanteca, and it's basically where you make feather mosaics, with feathers. That's a long tradition that was invented, or long craftsmanship that was invented by the Toltecs, and it found its way through like Central Mexico, and people like the Mayans and the Mexica Tenochcas, Tlaxcalas, Tezcatecas. They use these to kind of paint a picture or whatever, and they decorate their shields with like with like symbols of like mosaics made of pure feather, and that has a long history. And there's a book that I want to get my hands on, right? But I can't get a hold of it right now because I have to go to the author's home in Ciudad de Mexico, in the state of Mexico, in Mexico, and like I have to go out there and buy the book from his home. But I don't really have my passport. Where like I think you need your book passport to kind of like fly out there, whereas I only have my card. So I don't want to drive down there, But yeah, so I can't fly out there, but that's a big advantage. And I spoke with the guy on the phone and everything. I contacted him. I was like, "Where'd you learn this?" I was like, "Oh, I had experience with this and this and that, and like I years of reconstructing all these things and stuff like that." And it's a dying art, sadly. Not a lot of people know about it, And I want to revitalize that, and that's a hobby that I'm getting into. So I'm like buying these feathers and shit like that, and like trying to get some money to go out there to Mexico and like make a video about this, trade, and like hopefully have more people to get into it, to keep it alive,
Yeah, thank you so much for telling. I knew you had a hobby. I was just like being sarcastic. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that with us. And yeah, we are actually at the end, but I think we can open up for some questions. Who knows? Maybe someone wants to ask you a question on here. So, Juancho, if you'll forgive me, I know we're somewhat on a time crunch, but
That's all
I'm just
good,
gonna
man.
drop it anyway. If anyone wants to like come on and like say hi. um, but yeah, I know some of you did have questions, and if you want to drop them now in here, if you want to come on, by all means, please do. And ask the questions that you might have posted a little bit earlier. Happy to answer them. You know, Frey, my question was to you, and I was saying, like, if we could have had, if Indigenous people, prior to 1492, could have had like one thing that most of the world had, and we unfortunately did not possess or had little resources to it. Mine would have been medicine or advancement in medicine. So, like, 90% of the populations wouldn't have died out.
Like a vaccine?
Yeah, like a vaccine. Someone else might say swords, or like steel armor, or like horses, boats. Perhaps we had codexes, but the Chinese, I think, printing paper, came from something of that nature. So if you could like maybe think of one thing for indigenous people to have that would possibly help them throughout like the years of like colonization, or would have prevented like a lot of crises, then what would one thing be?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Yeah, I think I might have found myself thinking or fantasizing about that. Oh man, yeah, that's a tough one, bro. That's a tough one.
I think about
I
it a
would,
lot.
yeah, I would say this, but I know that's gonna piss a lot of people off because some indigenous people kind of like, or some people in the indigenous diaspora have a very bad bias towards like vaccine, or there's like this negative stigma. But if you think about it, a lot of the diseases that slaughtered our people, right? Because the Spaniards didn't slaughter us, Like even if you look into the Codex Florentine and the siege of Tenochtitlan, the Spaniards did make a great assault and they did put up a big fight, but the Mexica were actually this close to win. They were this close to win. Believe it or not, you can read the codices yourself. But the main thing that kind of disabled them was that a lot of the military and a lot of the population kind of dwindled because of smallpox. Smallpox today is under control, thankfully, along with polio and other diseases because of a vaccine. So imagine if we had the vaccine, because think about it, like 90% of the population was wiped out because of a disease that we now have in control over because of vaccines. Kind of makes you want to reevaluate, the concept or your bias of like vaccines, because it's like if they had vaccines back then, smallpox would have been like, just like a cough or whatever, So I think that would have been cool, maybe.
Yeah, no, I agree. That would have been cool too. It would have saved a lot of people. So yeah, thanks for answering that. I think if I could have brought another possible invention, it probably would have been like boats, as in like giant sailboats to get the indigenous populations back then to like Asia, and then finally go into trade, because that's what Spain and a lot of other European countries had over like indigenous populations, is because they got to trade like all over the old world. And unfortunately, the indigenous people of the Americas didn't have that option. They did get to trade, I think, with
I think
Polynesian people.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was actually about to say that, like in Peru, I think they actually sailed out to the Polynesians, to the Polynesian islands,
Yeah.
because I know in Peru they actually found a graveyard of chickens, and they've genetically tested those chickens, and those chickens come from the Polynesian, variant,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. That's really crazy. I think they said that they had found potatoes
that too.
in the Polynesian islands.
Kumara, and Kumala are the words for potato in Polynesia and in the indigenous Quechua language, right? I think the difference between the word is just the L or the R, and they themselves have like they themselves in Polynesia have stories of little people showing up or washing up on their shores and taking their women and stuff like that. And there's an ancient Peruvian king. I don't know how credible that is, but apparently he made a book. He made a boat off of totora reeds. You know, the reeds that grow in Peru. You just like cut them up and you just let them out to dry, and they create these reeds where it's like buoyancy and floating and stuff like that. They tie them up together and they make surf boats with
It's
surfboards, and
insane.
apparently they made a boat out of that and they sailed out. You know, they made that journey, and a guy by the name of Thor something, some like Norwegian. Uh, I think he's a professional in archaeology, anthropology. He wanted to prove that that's actually possible because people didn't think that that was possible to make a boat out of that, and he actually made it, and he actually sailed to the Polynesian Islands, you know, on that boat on his own, you know.
That's nuts. That's so
Yeah,
crazy. I'm looking at the map now, and I guess it was an island across from Peru, or maybe it was like Easter Island.
possibly.
Perhaps there's no way, like, or maybe got all the way over to like Hawaii or like Samoa or Tonga, Fiji, or one of those countries. I mean, maybe I guess there's always a
Yeah,
possibility. That's pretty
yeah,
far.
yeah. You know, that's actually one of the few cultures that I accept that had, you know, intercultural relations. You know,
Hmm.
just two. That's it. You know, for me. And it's the Polynesians. You know, that's one of them. I believe that happened. You know, why not? You know, so there's the chickens. You know, what else? Like how do the chickens get there? You know,
Hmm.
no chicken can survive the Beringia, you know, type of you know, migration or whatever. So it's like, what's the other way? You know, and that and the Vikings. You know, the Vikings have a settlement in Nova Scotia in Canada.
Yeah, that's true. Up north as well. And then you have to like not forget about like, well, you have Alaska, and you have the Bering, you have Bering Strait like near Siberia, but I don't know what resources would have been in Siberia. I mean, I guess not really so much steel or anything. Anyway,
Yeah,
questions for another time. Um, but yeah, I think Thomas had a question that was I asked if intergenerational trauma is prevalent in indigenous communities across Latin America, like it is in North America. We had a discussion in the chat. Mm, what do you guys think? I mean, it's very likely. And you have the governments in Central and South America that have caused a lot of harm to indigenous communities since the existence of the countries. So
yeah,
it's highly likely. I mean, likely it is, I would say.
I'm sure
yeah,
it's
yeah.
likely.
Definitely. No, 100%, man. I mean, like, if you look at history of some other countries in Latin America, you would see that they went through a lot of trauma, you know, and not to speak down or any shame to those other countries, you know, but some of those countries are also behind in like psychology, you know, so it's like it's not really accessible or it's not really known about, you know, psychology and going through trauma. So if like that country, for example, like in El Salvador, where the guerrillas, you know, the civil war, you know, I've actually known a lot of Salvadoran people, and they told me their stories, like people who are like the age of 40 at that time. You know, they were veterans of the war, and there's even couples who were married. You know, who were on a different spectrum. Like the husband was a soldier, you know, for the government, and his wife was the one that was fleeing from the war. You know, and they told me their stories, and I'm like, wow, dude, this is really traumatic. I don't understand how a little girl such as yourself would be able caught in a gunfight, you know, with your village and the government, you know, for an hour, and they're running off into the forest, abandoning everything, you know, and then get a gun pointed at you whenever they'll track you down, you know, and it's like when that's trauma, you know, even leaving your home and changing to a different city, that's trauma, you know. So, and if your family, you know, doesn't know how to cope with that trauma, and they snap at you and they abuse you and they pick up drinking and they start, you know, raising their hand at you and stuff like that, and they don't know how to cope with their trauma, you're creating intergenerational trauma that's inherited to you, and then you inherit that to your kids, you know. So yeah, it's very prevalent in
Mm,
indigenous communities across Latin America, you know.
yeah.
And also, there's other examples. Like for example, Guatemala. Guatemala slaughtered a bunch of Mayans. Mexico slaughtered a bunch of indigenous people as well. You know, so yeah, definitely for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Peru, too, like with the sterilization. So, of course, there are tons of trauma. really, and then go about Argentina, Chile. We could talk about it. One day we will make a video dedicated to the ridicule of governments in Central and South America and their treatment towards indigenous people. But we'll ridicule them, I think, for another time because it is almost 2 hours. But did anyone have any other questions perhaps they would like for us to answer before we wrap up here? Let's give shout outs again to those that are in the chat that weren't being trolls. But I think the trolls are gone.
Yeah.
Shout out to Destiny, Soul, Sarah, Gabby. I know Annie was here. And everybody else. Thank you all for coming on in. Frey, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about? Are you good for the most part? With us? Perhaps you had a question for us?
That question? Nah. I mean, I don't think I have a question for you guys, but I do have something to say, and I think it's it's going back to indigenous values, right? It's like learn indigenous values, guys. Reconnecting natives who are watching this. What is an indigenous value, right? And this is your guys' lesson from me, Frey, Frey the Great. A value is like having to like hold something of like high importance, right? Something that's very important, right? Or respect. And an indigenous value is very much the same thing, but to your community, to your indigenous community. And know that it's like a certain respect for certain aspects of your community. For example, one indigenous value is a language. The language is very valuable. It's sacred. It went through a lot. It went through colonization, and realized that it survived. After we have certain languages, others are very unfortunate, but in some cases, like myself, my language is still prominent, along with like it having to have 30 even more different variants of itself. So the respect, for the language is has a high value, whereas when you learn about your language and you begin to study it, you learning your language, don't speak about the language, don't speak the language or don't teach the language. There we go. Don't teach the language as if you learned it or as if you're a native speaker and you know all the definitions for it. That's a space for the native speakers. In my community, there are native speakers who know the language and who know their structure and who teach, the language. And someone who's like teaching the language for them when they don't know the language themselves or they're barely learning it is an act of disrespect to the community. And that's actually, a cultural boundary that people are sometimes want to overstep, because I'm seeing people who don't know the language very well, who aren't fluent, and they try to come on here and they have like 250,000 followers or whatnot, and they have a humongous platform, and they say today's word of the day is, or this is how you say this, or this is the definition of this word, when them themselves aren't, speakers of the language. We have to give the space to native speakers, because they're the ones who know the language, who know the sentence structure, who know the actual definitions of it, So that's a value and a respect that we must have towards indigenous, towards, our indigenous values. Another thing would have to be, listen to what your community says, for example, and like when it comes about like a social structure, right? For example, like if there's like an issue going on with the community, listen to what their issue is and see how you can help. That's having a value to the community because you respect the community. That's your community. It's been around for maybe even thousands of years, and you got to respect it because it's been around for that long, because someone at one point wanted to eradicate that, So it's very important to recognize that that's another indigenous value, that there's you and then there's a community, right? Someone like myself who has been disconnected from that community, you have to have the value and, meet with that community. And yeah, I even speak with some native speakers, right, on a daily basis, and like Juan Choloa's name gets thrown around in the mix sometimes because like they just respect like how you went back to the Guachicil Nation and like reconnected and had a ceremony and all that. They watch that and they even throw you in a conversation. Sometimes native speakers who are actually born and raised in their own communities, and they they throw your name out there, like as in like, wow, that guy is fucking awesome, It's
Hey,
like,
I
yeah,
appreciate
dude.
it.
Yeah, dude. So yeah, you have a pretty good, you're on their good side, here on the Nawa, communities, they really respect you for doing that because like some people they tend to get things, they place their values, they're misplaced, whereas they will listen to someone else rather than the member of the community, And also another value for for your community is that you're not a speaker. Just because you're of an indigenous descent of that community, that doesn't make you a speaker. You can't speak for them, unless you're elected. Like here, with the Nawas, it's like to become a speaker, for your people, you have to be elected, through this traditional, government or whatever. The way how they've been governing themselves for years or centuries, they still have that, So in order for you to be a speaker for your community, you have to be elected. So if there's an issue or whatever that you need context of, always remember to ask, the members of your community and stuff like that, for those kind of things. And also, don't try to appropriate other people's, culture. For example, someone like me who's of Nawa descent, you won't see me wandering around with a Lakota war bonnet and stuff like that. That's disrespectful.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Thank you, Frey, for giving that feedback to all reconnecting natives out there that are watching. They appreciate it too. I think someone had a question. Believe there were two people. There's Sarah and Big Ant. So Sarah was, yes, what are your opinions on indigenous values when it comes to women? Latino men have bad reputation as being machista. What could be done to change it? Well, you talked about
Damn.
machismo.
Yeah, yes. What are your opinions on indigenous values when it comes to women? Latino men have a bad reputation as being machistas. What can be done to change it? So, women have been disrespected for a very long time, right? And Latino men, right, quote unquote Latino men and Hispanics and stuff like that, we've learned to normalize disrespecting women by like, this misogynistic, patriarchal way. And we need to kind of we need to not kind of we need to unlearn that. We got to respect women. And because if you think about it, if you study even the genetics of the indigenous people of central Mexico, there's been studies done on like, on genetics on different indigenous groups. For example, in Mexico and Central Mexico, about like on the maternal side of one in Mexico has like 60% like indigenous on average blood on the mother side, and it's like 30 to 20% on the paternal side. So the indigenous, I guess like blood or whatever or DNA survived through the mother, So that's a very powerful value, and it doesn't make sense to disrespect women, because women in Mexico are strong, you know. Feminists down there, they go hard, They go hard and they deserve to be respected. And we need to unlearn a lot of this machismo stuff because some indigenous communities respect women and they hold women as a high value or they value them very highly, you know. And yeah, we got to stop, disrespecting them and unlearn this like Spanish and colonial, type of like way of like machismo and stuff like that, And yeah.
Thanks for that response. I have my own thoughts on like, machismo too. And I think people that try to defend it will be like, no, machismo means like installing, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like male-led patriarchy. Yeah. Inside the household to keep like law and order. And, my problem with machismo, I mean, like you can look at Honduras and El Salvador, and see how machismo is playing out in certain parts of that country. I mean, isn't it Honduras or one of those two countries that have like the issue with like homicide for women?
I think so.
Or
Yeah. That's also very prevalent in Mexico too.
yeah.
The femicide. It's a big issue. Like I think like about not even a week ago, where women were like a lesbian couple were murdered out there in Juarez. Like you can't even express your own love, and your own sexuality in front of some of these countries without being terrorized or even killed. And it's really messed up. you know So yeah, man, and you definitely need to, and also have some personal experiences as well. Like, don't be afraid of like calling out machismo or challenging it. You know, it's a fight. It really is, because like I said in a previous, you're unlearning a lot of this trauma. That we've like kind of been instilled. By, I guess, the colonizers and stuff. It's a terrible fight, and it's a hurtful one. But we're tough. We're indigenous people. We survived this long. We could take we could take anything. As long as we cope with it really well and we find a support system. And um, and also realize that some of your family members, including the women in your family, might have some of that internalized, misogyny. My mom does. My mom has a lot of internalized misogyny. All her family members do as well. I'm married. I'm pretty sure we made that clear in the beginning. And my family was very, very upset when they found out that my wife doesn't cook. And just for reference, my wife is a radical feminist. And like they were very upset that she doesn't cook. And like they were very upset when I actually married her. Like, why did you marry a woman who doesn't cook? A woman's supposed to clean for you, supposed to cook for you, supposed to do this and that, wipe your ass and all this shit. I was like, first of all, you're not gonna dictate how I live my life or how my relationship or my marriage is okay. First of all, she doesn't cook because she can't. Let's be honest, babes, can't cook. They call it cook king because a king is supposed to be in the kitchen. Now I'm just playing. So it's like I like to cook, dude. I have a history of working in restaurants, and I cook my own meals, and I'm really good with food. And it's like I cook. I love to cook. It's one of my passions, one of my hobbies as well. I cook. I could throw down on a freaking. I could throw down in a kitchen, you know. And my aunt, and with her internalized misogyny, is trying to take that away from trying to take me away from my passion, or one of the things I love, one of the things I use to cope with things. She's taking that away from me because of her internalized misogyny, her internalized machismo, you know. And it's tough because I had to cut off some family members because of that, and I've lost relationships with some family members because they wanted me to be part of the patriarchy. And no, that stops with me, bro. It's like I love to cook, and I'm not gonna make my wife cook for me or whatever. I'm the one that actually cleans the house. I clean the house. I'm good at cleaning and shit. So yeah, tough fight.
Yeah. Thank you a lot for answering that. Yeah, I have my issues with that sort of, patriarchy, like always demanding or, expecting a woman to like fulfill all these like requirements. It's quite silly to me and does not fit in with our current modern, civilized world, in my opinion. But yeah, I think someone else had one other question. There's Big Ant is like, what do you think of ethnocentrics who try to make connections between Mesoamerican languages and East Asian languages? I think maybe he's referring to Wapos.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there are connections where like people from like the Dine and the Inde, people. Some linguistics have already made a connection between, their language and a certain group in Siberia or in Russia, next to a river. And they found some linguistic comparisons, and I don't know if that's what he's referring to, or maybe he's referring to I guess the Wabos or whatever. But yeah, he might have to provide some more context to that.
Perhaps. Maybe I don't know where Big Ant is. Maybe he's sleeping, but you can maybe drop the question again later in the comments, and we can always try to answer it then. That being said, I believe we are at 2 hours and 8 minutes, so an hour overtime. But I had fun. It was good. I had a lot of fun, answering questions and getting your feedback on a lot of things. Right? Like it was really good. Quanchalo, did you have anything at all to say?
No, it's been a good episode, guys. I appreciate being here with you.
Yeah. Fry, if you didn't have anything to add, or were you good for the most part?
No, I'm good for the most part, man. Yeah, I'm good. I guess what started you, Juan Chaloa, on your whole, your genealogy, journey? Because I find that very interesting.
It was just well, I mean, like I didn't really know what the race was for a lot of Hispanics, so like I just started digging into it, got the DNA test, and just started researching. And then I just thought it was really odd, like when you compare the identity of us, even if we're like mixed with two races. I thought it was interesting that we have this mindset of mestizo and mixed crap, but you know, other races, like for example, black people that are mixed as well, don't have that. They go with the minority race side. And so I just started digging more into that, and it was a whole rabbit hole that led me to here. So
oh damn.
Yeah, and so that then I started then I wanted to find out, well, yeah, you know, what exact groups I would come from. I didn't even know there was records, honestly, that I didn't even know I could get like my great grandparents' records or something like online. I thought all that shit just didn't exist or something. So it was a big surprise when I joined that Mexican genealogy group, and that's where I started learning all my stuff. I guess I'm like self-taught in the sense that like I did it all myself, but and that Mexican genealogy group, they basically would post all the time. So I would like a lot. At first I started out, I couldn't read any of the cursive. I had no idea what it said, and I was getting pretty triggered about it. So I took screenshots and I'd post it on there. I'd be like, hey, what the fuck does it say? And so they would tell me. And eventually I started like taking what they would translate the record for me, and then I'd start like comparing what they said it fucking said, and then I would look at it, and so I started like picking up on the patterns. And over time, like after like, you know, making my eyes bleed from staring at the screen so long, that's when I started learning how to actually read the records myself. So yeah, and I was able to trace so much. Well, I mean, I'd like dropped like over like 800 hours of time to, you know, find that / colon descent record and all those Guachil records. And right now I'm just working on, I'd like to be able to get my Portuguese citizenship from a Sephardic Jewish ancestry because I have plenty of it, which is kind of funny. A lot of these haters will say your Spanish side and blah, 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 but it's actually, from what I've found out from my own genealogy, I'm actually more Jewish, predominantly Jewish descent. And then and not only that, but it'd be Portuguese people. So actually there's no Spanish side for real. It's Portuguese and Jewish side.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah, you know what's
crazy.
crazy? I also have like a pretty good chunk of Portuguese ancestry as well.
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny when people like try to oversimplify it or like try to shove you into a box, and then later you're like, yeah, that never fucking works, bro. Like you can't do that to people if you don't even know their background. You just look like a clown when you do it.
Yeah, dude, for sure.
Yeah, I found out that I had like, well, I didn't always. I found out that I had like a 1% like Portuguese ancestry, but that wasn't there when I got my test. Like all of a sudden I found out, so who knows? But yeah, I'm going to assume no one has any other questions, but I think we'll have like a very short after party. The link's there, so if y'all want to join, if you don't like being on the panel or something, that's cool too. But we are going to wrap this up as it is 1 a.m. my time. That being said, thank you so much, panel. Well, Frey, thank you for coming on. It was a great time. I had fun. Wanchloa had fun. Audience had fun. And you had fun. It's important too.
Fun, dude.
Yeah. So, and we look forward to having you on again, you know, in the future.
For sure, definitely, man. I'm open.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. We'll have live panels again and more people come on, and it'll be fun. But yeah, I think we're going to close this out. So for everyone watching, you guys all have a good night or a good morning, wherever you are on this planet. And we are going to end the broadcast. So goodbye, everybody. Peace.
I hate you, haters.